So I'll continue to make general passes to refine my island, and I threw in a couple of textures. I grabbed the texture brush, chose to edit texture, and added textures. And I've loaded a couple of different textures from the Unity provides a textures asset. Now, by default, you may not have all the same textures that I have, but you can always jump into the Unity asset store by going to Window, Asset Store, and there's tons of free assets that you can pick up to help kind of jumpstart your game environment. There's a lot of pay for, but there's also a lot of free assets. And if I just scroll down, you see there's a top free assets. And if I look in here, there's probably, there it is, there's a link to the terrain assets. And if I click on that, it'll open up the terrain assets. And you can see these are free. They're published by Unity. And you can scroll down here and it'll give you a sense of what's available. But if you hit the import button, yours might say download. You have to download first and then hit import. When you click import, this wizard will pop up. By default, everything is selected, and you can hit the import button down here in the bottom right. And at that point, you'll have access to these terrain assets. Once you have access to those, you can choose to edit and add texture. And when you hit the select button, you'll have more options to choose from. So I have these grass, lawn, and meadow textures. If I want to load this grass meadow, I'll just double click on it. I'll choose add, and now that pops up down here. If I want to delete a texture, I can select it. You can see there's a little blue highlight that indicates it's selected. I can go to edit textures and choose to remove or edit depending on what I want to do. In this case, I want to remove the redundant texture because I've already loaded it. And I made a quick pass just to kind of add a little bit more contrast, and I'll continue to make this pass a general pass over my island and to continually add detail to it. So as I start to explore my island, I'll get a sense of where I'm at and say, okay, well, this is kind of flat and boring, so I want to add some gentle hills and mix up the landscape and maybe make a point of interest that's not so far off in the distance. I'm going to continue to modify these mountains and so on. So I want to spend a little bit more time talking about some basic special effects that we can add into our scene. I have this volcano, which is a major point, a major area of focus, and I think it'd be interesting if this volcano was smoking and glowing as well. And I can achieve a basic glowing effect by just introducing an additional light source. So I'll go to Game Objects, Create Other, and I'll choose to create a point light. Now at this point we've created a directional light that's like an it's a light that has a direction that's infinitely far away. We can think of that as our kind of sunlight or moonlight. In this case, I'm going to introduce a point light, which we can think of as kind of a light bulb. And so I'll just move this over and move it back, and kind of lucked out. Mine was relatively close to my volcano, but I'm going to look at it from a top-down view and kind of set it inside the volcano. I'll look at it from a side view and make sure that it's up high enough to where I can see, and now I'll zoom back in. Now when it comes to these point lights, they have a range, and you can see this cage around the light shows me the range that I have. And so what I'll do is I'll just kind of move this down a little bit. I'm going to change the color, and I'll change this to a color that's maybe more red or orange. I'll just shift that to this color, and I'll increase the range, and I can do that by using this cage, or I can use this value here, and I'll just kind of move that over just so I can start to see it spilling over the edge of my volcano. So I'll temporarily place it here just so I can see the effect of that. Let me go a little bit closer. Just play with the intensity and the color of the light to get it right, but for now, already if I look back at my volcano, I should start to see the results of this. So yeah, I can start to see it kind of glowing a bit there along the edge. If I introduced a more high contrast sky, that would be a little bit more dramatic, but I can continue to play. Oops, didn't want to do that. Let's select my point light again. So again, a point light, the idea is you can think of this kind of like a light bulb. It's a point in space that light emanates in all directions from that light. So again, I'm just trying to catch the edge for now for the sake of the demo, and that's pretty much what I want to do. So I'm getting this kind of basic glowing effect. Now in addition to that, I could start to generate some smoke, and Unity comes with a particle system, which is a lot of fun, and you can use Game Object, Create Other, and you can just generate a particle system. And the minute that I do that, you can see that I'll just move this a little bit closer. I'm generating these particles. With the particle system selected, you can go in and tinker with all of these values in here to get the results that you want. Now, you can see this particle starts generating, and it's giving me this, magical kind of sparkle effect, and I can play with all of these values. If I want this to last longer, I could bump up the duration. Now these particles should live a little bit longer. I could look at the emission here and bump up the number of particles that are being generated, the shape that's being generated, and of course, lifetime and all these different values. Now, in Unity, it can be kind of overwhelming to look at all the different parameters and properties that you can change for an asset. And Unity does a really good job of providing documentation for all of this. And in many cases, you can just float your mouse over, and if you just hover over one of the elements, you'll get a tooltip, which gives you an idea, give you a really brief explanation of what that field is. In addition to that, if anytime you see a little book with a question mark on it, you can click on that book and it'll take you to the live documentation for that asset. And it'll give you a pretty thorough explanation. And I do want to point out that if I close this again, if I go to the transform component and I click on the question mark there, it'll take me directly to the transform reference online. So this is a really handy thing. So a lot of times if you get overwhelmed or don't know what you're looking at, it's very helpful just to click on this little help button and read a little bit about it. And in most cases, it'll break down the individual elements or the fields that you're looking at. So now I could start off with this basic particle system. I'll hold down Command and Delete and get rid of that. But also, when I originally loaded this project, I brought in some assets that I could use. I'll go into my assets folder. If I look in here, I have a particles folder, and inside the particles folder, there's some presets for dust, fire. I'll skip legacy particles because that uses an older particle engine, and there's one for smoke. And if I look in smoke, there's two fluffy smoke. The second one is just larger, and I'll click and drag and drop that into the scene. And so right off the bat, I got this smoke that's being generated, and now that smoke may not be exactly what I want, but at least it's a good kind of starting point. So this can be very helpful if you're trying to get an effect. You can start off with a basic preset and then take a closer look at it and understand what the starting parameters are of that. And so if I just look through here and start to play with some of these values, I'll play with the size. And you can see that makes the smoke much bigger. That's probably more of what I want. But I'll start to play with these examples, and that was probably a little too big, so I'll take that back down. But I'll play with things like, maybe I'll try the world velocity along the y-axis. And if I change the y-axis, you can see that starts sending smoke vertically. That's a little too fast, so I'll take that down. Maybe let's see how 5 treats us. And again, so I'll just play with these values. I'll continue to tinker with this. I'll bump up my minimum size and my maximum size. And that's a little closer to what I want. Again, it's still moving a little too fast. But then if I want to imply some wind, maybe I'll change the velocity from y, and I'll throw in a little bit of x velocity as well. And so these clouds should start, or this volcano should start to drift kind of off into one direction. And maybe I want to send it back in the z space as well. I could send some randomness into the equation, so maybe it starts blowing a little bit more randomly. Let me send it back along the z and really dramatically along the x. Not quite that much. There we go. So you can start to see that I'm really kind of creating, an interesting smoking effect. Looks like the wind's taking it, and there's also different kind of elements. We might even be able to find a wind element in here, but you can really kind of dial this in and get it to look pretty good. So play with those values, start to think about the lights. And at this point, I'll continue to refine this offline a bit. And, at this point, as far as the aesthetics of it, it's really just about the process and spending time tweaking all of this stuff. In the next presentation, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about scripts and interactivity, but we'll do that in the next presentation.